Hey everyone, welcome back for another deep dive. Today we're tackling a figure who's both celebrated and criticized. Jim Pattison, a Canadian billionaire, built an empire, but definitely stepped on some toes along the way.
And what's so interesting is the mix of sources we have on him, right? Like glowing biographies, praising his business skills, but then books that really go after his tactics.
Yeah, totally. And that's why we're going in with absolutely no sugarcoating. This is a guy who started with a single car wash and ended up owning Ripley's Believe It or Not, a huge chunk of Canadian forestry, and even distributed a book that wasn't exactly flattering to him. Like,
Yeah.
what a power move, I asked that.
Total paradox, right? But to get it, we got to go back to the beginning. Born during the Depression, Pattison's family, they had it rough. His dad was taking odd jobs just to get by. Seemed like that instilled a hustle in Jim from like day one.
Oh, yeah. 7 years old, selling seeds door to door. I mean, most kids are worried about cartoons at that age, and he's out
Okay.
there making deals.
Yeah.
That's not just a kid with a lemonade stand. That's like future tycoon material right there.
Exactly. And what's fascinating is how that early experience, that gotta hustle mentality, shaped his whole approach to business later on. It wasn't just about money, it was that drive, that relentless work ethic that he became known for.
So fast forward a bit. He's working his way up in the car business, starts with washing them, but quickly realizes he's got bigger ambitions. Then comes 1961, the big turning point. He takes out this massive loan, $40,000, a fortune back then, to open his own Pontiac dealership. That's the official start of the Jim Pattison Group.
Gutsy move, no doubt, but that risk, it paid off big time. Launched him into the stratosphere of Canadian business. But here's where things get really interesting. Pattison wasn't content with just selling cars. He started diversifying, and I mean, like crazy why.
And this is where you see the strategy, the genius of it all. We're talking grocery chains, media companies, packaging, entertainment, even the controlling stake in Canfor, the big forestry player. It's almost like he was building a business Noah's Ark, ready for any economic storm.
And that diversification. It wasn't just spreading his interests, it was calculated risk mitigation. Having his fingers in so many pies meant he was protected if any one sector took a hit.
Okay, but this is where the no sugarcoating part really comes in. His tactics, especially with acquisitions, they weren't exactly making him friends. This creeping takeover strategy, it was controversial, to say the least. What even eyes that? How'd that work?
So imagine a company with publicly traded shares. Pattison would start buying them up bit by bit, often without drawing too much attention to himself. And then, bam! He's got enough to basically control the company, taking it over without a huge public fight.
It's like sneaking in the back door instead of a big grand entrance. Why was that so controversial, though?
Well, some saw it as like sneaky, underhanded even. Other companies felt blindsided, like he was playing by different rules, and they didn't appreciate it much.
Makes sense. So we've got this super sharp businessman building this massive empire. But there's the flip side. The philanthropist. Donating millions to hospitals, universities, you name it. How do we square that with the guy who's accused of being ruthless in business?
Right. $1 million question. Is the philanthropy genuine generosity, or is it strategic, a way to soften his image when he's got all these criticisms coming at him?
And it's not just money, right? It's his whole management style, too. Decentralized, gave his managers a lot of freedom, but also demanded those quarterly meetings, detailed reports, even driving thousands of kilometers himself to inspect his businesses.
It's wild, right? He gives autonomy but demands accountability. Effective, sure, but also intense pressure. Imagine being one of his managers knowing the boss might just pop up at your office, scrutinizing everything.
Talk about a performance review, huh? But it speaks to that work ethic. Even in his 90s, the guy's hands-on. And then the fact that he kept the Pattison Group private,
Yeah.
most companies at that level go public, but not him. Why stay private? What's the advantage there?
That decision, it's key to understanding his long-term vision. See, by staying private, he avoids the pressure from shareholders who want quick profits. He can make decisions that Wall Street might hate, but that HEE believes are best for the company in the long run.
It's like he's playing chess while everyone else is doing checkers, thinking decades ahead, not just next quarter's earnings. And that brings us to another thing that's so important about him, his financial conservatism. He was always careful, right?
Oh, absolutely. Known for avoiding risky ventures, super careful with debt, weathered economic storms that would have crushed other companies. It's that slow and steady approach that let him build this empire over decades.
Okay, so we've got the ambition, the diversification, the private ownership, the philanthropy. But we haven't even gotten to the really controversial stuff, the labor disputes, the accusations of union busting, the tax avoidance strategies. That's a whole other layer to this, right?
And that's where things get even more complex, even more no sugarcoating. Because to truly understand Jim Pattison, you got to look at the whole picture. The good, the bad, the wins, and the controversies.
And that's exactly what we're going to do. We're going to unpack those controversies, look at the accusations, the evidence, try to understand the impact of his decisions. But that's a story for part 2.
All right, so let's talk Jim Pattison, the deal-making machine, right? We're talking a guy who evaluates hundreds of deals every year, closes a ton of them. It's not just luck, it's constant drive and strategic thinking.
It really ought mind-boggling. Always on the hunt for that next opportunity.
Yeah.
But it's not just the quantity, it's how he approached them, right? Methodical, but decisive.
Exactly. He didn't rush in, thorough evaluation process, due diligence, all that. But once he saw the right chance, he moved fast and with precision.
And this is a guy in his mid-90s still running this huge company. What fuels that drive, that longevity? Most people that age are, relaxing on a beach somewhere, not battling it out in the boardroom.
It's a great question. Gets to the heart of who he's right? Is it pure ambition? A legacy thing? Maybe even a fear of slowing down, of letting go?
Probably a bit of everything. But here's something else I think is key, and it might surprise people. His willingness to embrace technology, even in these old school industries.
You're talking about Pattison Go, that data and analytics thing. Seems counterintuitive, right? Old school businessman, suddenly all about big data.
Totally. Shows he was willing to adapt, stay ahead.
Yeah.
He saw that data wasn't just for tech companies, it was a tool for anyone to get an edge.
And what's interesting is Pattison Go wasn't just collecting data, it was using it to connect all the different parts of the Pattison group, like a nervous system, making everything run smoother, make better decisions.
So not clinging to the old ways, he's future-proofing the whole thing. Makes you wonder if he was planning for this empire to keep going long after he's gone.
Could be. Adds another layer to this guy, that's for sure. But now let's address the elephant in the room, shall we? The controversies that followed Pattison throughout his career. Remember, no sugarcoating, and this is where it gets really important.
Right, the darker side of the empire. We talked about the aggressive acquisitions, but there's a lot more to unpack.
Yeah.
Let's start with those union-busting accusations. Pretty serious stuff, and paints a different picture than the philanthropist one.
Absolutely. Numerous times, Pattison was accused of actively trying to stop unions from forming at his companies. And we're not talking just discouraging membership. There are allegations of intimidation, making things hostile for organizers, even firing people involved in union activities.
Wow. If that's true, it really makes you question the whole philanthropy thing, I'll donate millions, but won't let my employees unionize.
Raises questions about priorities, for sure. And it feeds into that broader criticism of his cost-cutting. Countless examples of him buying a company, then massive layoffs, pay cuts, slashing benefits. Supporters say it was all about efficiency, making things better.
But critics see it as profits over people, plain and simple. And you can't ignore the human cost, right? Families struggling, communities hit hard by job losses.
It's not just numbers, it's how those decisions were made. Lack of empathy, workers seen as expendable almost. The Canfor thing is a perfect example.
Yeah, the forestry giant, huge GE deal, gave Pattison control over a vital industry. But controversial, too. Didn't it lead to a ton of job losses and concerns about the environment?
Absolutely. Critics said Pattison, with zero forestry experience, was just going to squeeze profits out, not care about sustainability, and they worried about his history of cutting jobs to boost the bottom line.
And those fears, they came true, didn't they? Big layoffs, mills closing, more automation meaning even fewer jobs. Devastating for those communities that depended on forestry.
For sure. And while the industry was already facing challenges, Pattison's approach seemed to make them worse. Like short-term gain over the long-term health of the whole thing and the people in it.
It's complicated, no doubt, but it gets to the ethical stuff, right? Where's the line between good business and exploitation? How tough is too tough?
Exactly. A question we all got to ask when looking at these powerful figures.
And it's not just labor, it's taxes too. Pattison was very outspoken about hating high taxes. And he was really good at using loopholes, offshore accounts, all that, to minimize what he paid.
Total do as I say, not as I do situation. Donating millions on one hand, but using every trick to avoid taxes that could fund public services, the very things many of his employees relied on.
Yeah, the hypocrisy is kind of hard to miss. Fuels the whole debate about the ultra-rich, right?
See?
Do they have a moral obligation to do more, pay more, even if they don't want to? Or is it their money, do what they want?
Tough question, no easy answers, but it's a conversation we need to have, especially now, with wealth inequality being what it is.
So this complex picture is forming, right? Brilliant businessman, relentless deal maker, even an innovator in his way. But D, also the ruthless cost cutter, union buster, tax avoider. It's a lot.
It is. And we got to remember, these aren't isolated things. It's a pattern, a way of doing business that led to huge success, but also a lot of controversy.
Makes you wonder, what drives a guy like that? Is it just money and power, or is there something more, some deeper thing we're missing?
That's the question we'll try to answer in the next part of our deep dive. We'll look at specific deals, the companies, the controversies, see if we can understand the man behind the empire a little better.
And as we do, let's keep those tough questions in mind. No shying away from the complexity, from the uncomfortable truths under the surface of this whole thing. Okay, so we've really gotten into it, haven't we? The successes, the strategies, but also the controversies around Jim Pattison. And I keep thinking back to that no sugarcoating idea, because it seems like with every brilliant thing we uncover, there's a shadow side too.
Yeah, it's true. That's what makes this whole thing so fascinating. Can't separate the ambition and drive from the tough calls and how those calls affected people's lives, right?
And you mentioned Can 4 earlier as like a prime example. Let's dig into that a bit more. We know it meant job losses, worries about sustainability, but what were the specifics? What went down when Pattison took over this giant company?
Well, remember, he was an outsider coming in, zero background in forestry, which made some folks nervous from the get-go. They saw him as a, what's the word, corporate raider, more interested in profit than the forests themselves or the people who depended on them.
And those fears weren't totally crazy, right? We've talked about his history with cost-cutting, streamlining, which often means jobs lost.
Right. And with Canfor, those worries, they became reality, and fast. Layoffs, mills shutting down, and then the move to automation, meaning even fewer jobs. Hit those small towns in BC that relied on forestry, hit them hard.
So not just numbers on a spreadsheet, it's people's lives being upended. Did Pattison ever explain these moves? Like, what was his reasoning?
He said the industry was already in trouble. Declining timber, competition from overseas, and that these tough calls, they were the only way to make Canfor competitive long term.
The classic efficiency argument, right? Streamline, cut costs, bigger profits.
Yeah.
But it comes at a human cost, like we said.
Exactly. And in this case, it really solidified that image of Pattison as, well, someone willing to sacrifice jobs, whole communities, all for profit. Added to that ruthless businessman idea.
And then there's the environment. Didn't people say he was putting short-term gains ahead of sustainable forestry?
Oh, absolutely. They said his focus on efficiency led to more intensive logging, clear-cutting huge areas, not enough replanting, not enough care for biodiversity.
So we've got this clash. Economic needs versus the environment. And it seems like Pattison sided with, well, making as much money as possible, even if it meant harming the environment.
That's the critique, yeah. And it's a debate that's still going strong in forestry today. How do we balance those needs, right?
Yep.
Jobs and growth versus protecting the forests for the future.
It's a tough one, that's for sure. And it gets to the ethics of it all, doesn't it? This power, this influence, where's the line? When does ambition become, I don't know, too much? It's a question that stays with you even after all this digging we've done. Jim Pattison, brilliant, no doubt, built this empire from nothing. But he also triggers strong feelings, both positive and negative.
That's what's so great about these deep dives, right? It's not about worshiping someone or tearing them down. It's about the nuance, the good and the bad, and each of us coming to our own WN conclusions about what this guy meant to the world.
And as we wrap this up, I'm kind of amazed by everything he did achieve. The scale of it is just wow. But there's also this uneasiness about how he did it and what those actions led to.
And that's what makes a story stick with you, I think. It makes you think harder, question things, even your OWN values. Makes you think about the legacy we'll leave behind.
So to everyone listening, what do you think? Visionary leader, ruthless capitalist, something in between. We want to hear from you. Because in the end, the Jim Pattison story isn't just about HM, it's about all of us. It's about the values we have, what we want to achieve, and the choices we make along the way.